All right, greetings everyone. It's Trey here on this 23rd day of June 2022. Here with my new friend Chad. Met him several days ago on YouTube. I had a conversation with someone else, and we were talking about, part of the subject we were talking about was predictive prophecy. And Chad had a question about, particularly with Micah 5:2, about the part of that prophecy is a few verses later where it says that Christ would be born in Bethlehem, or the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. There's some prophecy about the Assyrians, and he said, how does that work together? And so I gave him a few ideas of things that I thought. Said that's not my expertise, and I didn't really want to defend it, but he said, oh, come on. And he said, well, we'll talk 20 minutes on that and then talk whatever you want. So I said, all right, we'll go ahead and talk about it. So anyway, before we get going, Chad, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. I was wondering if you might be able to tell me just a little bit about yourself, and I can tell you about myself too as well.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm Chad. I'm 32, live in Colorado Springs. Until recently worked at a biotech company as a maintenance technician, but I decided to go back to school recently, and I'm studying to be a radiologic technologist. So I'm going into radiology, and I have a passing interest in theology and philosophy. And so, I came across one of Pine Creek's videos the other day and saw Trey here, and a lot of background noise. Are you hearing that?
Great. No, I'm at work, and there's a.
Oh, okay. I just want to make sure that wasn't. Okay. No, so I saw Trey's conversation with Pine Creek, and I thought, well, this guy seems pretty well educated. He might be able to answer some of my questions, because recently I've been really just looking into the question of whether Christianity is true. And it seems to me that one of the most important avenues to go down when considering that question is Jesus the Messiah? And if so, what does the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible say about the role of the Messiah and what he's supposed to do? And so that's why this verse in Micah is important to me. Why I think it matters. But so that's a little bit about me and how we got here.
Okay, so then would it be fair to say then maybe you believe in God, but you're not sure about Christianity, or are you an atheist?
So I'm agnostic. I do believe that there is some necessary foundation to reality, but I'm not convinced that it has mental properties. And if you want to get into that, we can. But I'm also, I don't feel that I necessarily have to start with answering that question in order to investigate the truth of Christianity. I mean, at the very least, I can probe the internal coherence of Christianity, to determine, is this even a possible candidate for something that's true? And if it is, I'd really like to know it. And if God exists as well, I'd really like to know that. And so, if you can give me good reasons to think that's true, or convincing reasons, then I'm not going to fight you on it. I mean, I hope there is a God. So I want to clarify from the outset, and I think I said this in the chat, that I'm really not interested in having a debate, but I do think we can have a productive conversation about these types of things without it being like a boxing match. So sure. I'm hoping, the conversation can go that way.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. All right. Well, so the thing I like, I was kind of like this with Pine Creek as well. That there is, I don't remember if I said that on it. Do you know who Reed Nicewander is?
No.
Okay, he's like, I had another conversation with one of you. See, do you know how I even got to meet Pine Creek?
No, I have no idea.
Oh, okay. Well, I let me just tell you a little bit. I had left social media for a while. I was on Facebook, and they kicked me out. And I never really liked Twitter. I was on it, but I never really used it. And I I left Facebook because they were just like throwing me in jail for saying I was engaging in hate speech when I was not. And I wasn't going to allow them to, define me and then ban me, permanently. So I left because they wouldn't give me an option to appeal. There's no appeal there. And so I left. It's been a couple of years, and I was a big Facebook user. I love Facebook, and a lot more than I did Twitter. Anyway, so I left that, and I'm still not. I just reactivated my account so that my business page can be seen, but I wasn't even on there at all. I thought that my business page could be seen, but I guess it couldn't. Anyway, so I recently also came back to Twitter, and they had deleted my account, so I started over. And basically because Elon Musk, I found was, buying it. I thought better chance of not getting into trouble for saying naughty things, and I'm not a anti-Semite or I'm just a Christian. But anyway, so I just within the last couple of days, I think I was like following Peter Boghossian. You know who Peter Boghossian is, don't you?
That sounds familiar.
He wrote a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists. He basically, Pine Creek is a disciple of his. Oh. And so Boghossian had commended these followers of him. There's like 11 of them, I think, or something. Said, hey, follow these guys. I haven't been following my page, but his page on, have you heard of Street Epistemology? Of course, you probably have. Because okay, well, this is all, Boghossian's the one that invented Street Epistemology. Basically, it's just a Socratic method. He asks questions. And so all these guys, he was commending them. So I went and said, boy, I sure wish I could get a conversation with somebody. I have a hard time finding people who want to talk. And so Pine Creek jumped in and said, yeah, I'll do it. And then not Todd.
This was on Twitter?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know Pine Creek was on Twitter.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. And so he's not that big, maybe because I found him by him being tagged. So he may not be that active on Twitter. And I tagged it in that where they would all get a notification that I said something. But and then also Reed Neiselander said that he would have a conversation, and we had that like 3 days ago. It was really good. But I don't think he's going to post it. He recorded it, I think, but I don't think he's going to post it. But anyway, he's like the president of Street Epistemology, their page. I think Magna Bosco was like the top dog, and Reed is like number 2, I think, or something. And by the way, Magna Bosco will not talk to me for anything. I keep inviting him, and he keeps declining. But anyway, so I came across those guys just in the last couple of days. So that's where that's where connection came in with that. And so anyway, the thing I want to say is that I always, I don't know if I said this with Pine Creek, but I did with Nice Wander. But I always want to begin, for me, with the things that I'm most certain about, and then move along to these other things that are peripheral. For example, prophecy is important, obviously. If in fact Christ was foretold, that would be an important thing. But that's the branches for me up at the top of the tree. But the root would be questions about, which are philosophical questions, but those are also called what the Bible calls natural theology. And there are also things that are available to everyone, because, people don't know about Jesus Christ. Not everybody knows about that. That's special revelation. And so not everybody has the opportunity to hear that. And that's not something you can just know. You have to learn it. But the things about natural theology is it's not something that takes special revelation to know. Everybody has access to it. And it's analytical in nature rather than synthetic. All right. So in other words, it's not empirical, it's rational. My argumentation for the existence of God is a rational argument. It's not, I call myself a classicist. A classicist is somebody who starts out with his argumentation with the existence of God, usually arguing cosmologically. My favorite argument is the contingency argument and a moral argument. And by using those two, Thomas had 5 ways, and the first 4, in my opinion, are quite similar, and the last one is different. But those arguments are not evidences; they're proofs. And I am different than an evidentialist. Do you know any Christian apologists that you've seen or encountered that you would know off the top of your head?
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know, just name off the top of my head, William Lane Craig.
Okay, William Lane Craig. He's kind of odd in that he's mostly an evidentialist, but he also kind of holds to at base like planting as reformed epistemology type, almost kind of like a precept is really kind of weird. But overall, I would say he's an evidentialist, and most of the apologists, like Frank Turk is.
Yeah.
Okay, I am theologically quite different from them. I'm a Calvinist. I'm a Reformed Baptist. And I'm a classicist, and these guys are all evidentialists. And what evidentialists is, usually they're going to focus on evidences from the Bible. They're going to start there, or start with the resurrection, or with the reliability of the Bible, or something like that. That's where they begin. The problem with that is those are empirical data that only can give you probability as to whether God exists. So all those guys.
Sorry, really quick.
Go ahead, sure.
I just have to use the restroom. Me, hold on, like.
Yeah, no problem.
1 minute.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry, I'm back.
No problem. All right, so I was saying that those guys are dealing with evidences, and it's empirical data, and I'm not dealing with empirical data. I'm dealing with rational data, and because I want to get certainty. Do you know the difference between proof and evidence? Okay, evidences are just something you experience with your senses, and the reason science is always changing is because our senses trick us, or our analysis, is weak or whatever like that. And so, if we have evidences, we only have probability. And if you ever see those guys argue, they're always going to say, to me, they're always kind of limp-wristed when it comes to God. Well, it's more likely than not that God exists. I'm not making that argument. Are you familiar with presuppositionalism?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so you know who Cy Tenberg and Cade is?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I'm an arch opponent to presuppositionalism. I don't think it's historic Christianity, and I don't think it's useful. I think it's useless for the most part. But ironically, the precepts are searching for certainty as well in their apologetical argumentation, and I am as well as a classicist. And so what I'm using, in my way I do it, I'm using like a classical argumentation, which is from the Middle Ages, and mostly Thomas Aquinas and people before that. But anyway, so an evidentialist is not going to, they're just going to say, well, yeah, it's more probable than not. A precept is going to say, God exists, you know it, and you can't account for anything like logic or morals or anything without presupposing him. The problem is they're begging the question. They're assuming the very thing they need to prove. Now, they would argue with me on that, but they are. And I think it's kind of useless in that endeavor, unfortunately, for them anyway. And I think it's just Enlightenment philosophy dressed up like Christianity. And they don't even know that. It's Immanuel Kant's philosophy that the transcendental argument was invented by Immanuel Kant. And Kant was claimed to be a Christian, but his epistemology is the very thing I'm trying to overcome in what I'm doing right now. But anyway, so for me, I always want to start with the things that I'm most certain of. I was talking to Reed when I said that I don't believe it's possible for creatures of any kind, anything is contingent or dependent existence, to have complete certainty about anything. Now, for the presuppositionalists, they say that by faith we have certainty, which to me is a contradiction in terms. Faith, by definition, is that you don't have certainty. And exercising faith, you're saying that you're not certain. But I also refer that we can't have certainty as dependent creatures because we don't know everything. Only God has certainty. And so, but I want to get as close to as I can to certainty. And so what I always tell my interlocutors is that I am more certain about God's existence than I am about your existence talking to me right now, because I don't know. You could be a dream or something, or a figment of my imagination, And so from my perspective, everything hinges upon, from my perspective, just my existence. That's all I need, is just me. And so are you familiar? Let me ask you this. I always ask for the same thing. If you listen to my things, I say the same things over and over, but would you grant me two presuppositions as we begin our conversation these are instrumental presuppositions? They don't commit the petitio principii or the begging the question fallacy, because they're instruments. I'm not making assertions with this. These are just tools that we need. This is classical foundationalism in order to get any information. Would you grant me the law of non-contradiction? In other words, rational coherence. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And would you grant me the basic reliability of sense perception? Not perfect, just that we can basically at least, at some degree, have some relationship to the world around us that could give us some information.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And everybody gives those to me too, but I just need to lay it out at the beginning, because sometimes as a conversation flows, it's important to come back to that. All right. So if it is true,
I'll just say a couple things on.
Yeah, you can interrupt anytime.
Yeah. So you talked about proof, and that you feel that your arguments meet the standard of, or meet the level of proof.
Right.
And I'm just curious if you have a theory as to why people like William Lane Craig, or I don't know, from my experience, when I listen to like some of the smartest philosophers, even theistic philosophers, like I don't know if you know who this guy is, Josh Rasmussen.
Yes.
When I listen to these people, a lot of I notice a kind of a correlation where the most thoughtful philosophers seem to be a little bit more tentative in the kinds of claims that they, or the level of certainty that they make about their conclusions. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious what you think it is that they're missing, that you understand that they don't.
Mm-hmm. Which is what Pine Creek was bringing out. And that's a great question. It is my opinion. Are you familiar with the importance of Kant's epistemology to the history of philosophy? How important that was?
No. Okay.
It was like considered to be a watershed moment in Western philosophy when Kant came up with his synthesis for knowledge. Because I don't know, are you familiar with René Descartes?
Yes.
Cogito ergo sum.
Yeah, I think I am. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a very important part of my argumentation. Just been very helpful for me to think about these things. So in the 17th century is considered the age of rationalism, and René Descartes comes along and says, I want to find out what's real. I want to find out what's true. That can't be doubted. How do I know that everything I'm doing is not a fever dream or something? I'm just not dreaming about everything. And he says, well, you don't really know. But then he, came to the idea and said, well, one thing I can't doubt is that I'm doubting, my own existence, or doubting that I'm thinking, and or doubting my own existence. If I'm doubting that I'm thinking, and so therefore I think, therefore I am. So if nothing else is true, I know that I, the inquirer, must exist. Otherwise, who's doubting? All right. And so what he did, and again, Descartes also was a Christian, and he was trying to protect religion from philosophy. All these guys, a lot of them are trying to do this, and they don't do a very good job. But anyway, so what he did is he took everything from the outside world. Knowledge was considered to be, there's a reality outside of us. This even goes further back, but I won't go into it, but there's a distinction between realism and nominalism. And realism is basically Platonic philosophy, that there are universals that inform all of the particulars we see in this world. Like, I'm an instantiation of the perfect human, stuff like that. And we know through remembering. And Aristotle basically brought everything down here. He was still a disciple of Plato, and he said, well, we know things through experiencing with our senses rather than thinking about them. But still, up until that time, from what I understand, it seems like up until that time, basically Descartes, everything was focused on ontology, everything outside of yourself. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to correspond everything outside of our minds and then learn from it. But what happened during Descartes is everything went from the outside to in here. And so the only knowledge that I have is, my own rational deduction. And I don't know if it corresponds to outside of me. All right, then after him came Hume, and Hume was a staunch empiricist. And he basically said, well, our senses are completely, they're always deceiving us all the time. And he said, we cannot experience causal relationships. Therefore, we don't even know if causality is true. I use the example of the rain falling on the grass. And he said, we see the rain fall and we see the grass get wet, but we don't know that the rain makes the grass wet. We just have these customary relationships. He said relationships of contiguity. These things touch each other. This happens and this happens, this has happened. And you use the example of billiards. You got the cue stick in your arm, pushing it and hitting the cue ball into the object ball. How do we know if they're not demons that are rearranging things? Because we can't see the causal relationship. And people that hear that oftentimes think how stupid that is, but it's a very profound observance, actually. And Immanuel Kant, when he saw that, he just said it awoke him from his dogmatic slumber. And he said he realized that Hume had a point, and he didn't write anything for like 10 years, just thinking about this. And so then he came up, and what he wanted to do is make a new way of knowledge, because he saw this. He said, this is going to ruin theology. This is going to ruin science. It's going to ruin everything if you can't have causal relationship. It's everything, And I won't go through the whole history of philosophy, but philosophy goes in cycles. And you have times of enlightenment and where people feel like they can cohere reality with a paradigm. And in that paradigm's, it's kind of like Hegel, I think the triangulation that he had, but and then there's a challenge to that, and then people become skeptical, and you see society begin to unravel, and then somebody comes with a new synthesis, and so that's what we're kind of seeing here with Kant. And Kant says, well, let's try to take some from rationalism and some from empiricism, and he goes, let's make a new way of epistemology. And he said, I don't know if we can get any knowledge at all. He said, but if we could get knowledge, what would we need? For sure. And he said, well, we'd have to have sense perception. So we'd have to be able to touch, experience it with our senses to get sensation, to be able to understand anything. But he said there are a few things that we can't experience with our sensations, or with our senses. And that would be, he said, God, the soul, and the essence of things. To this day, we still can't see the essence of, a plant. You look at a tree, you can look it down to the microscopic level, the subatomic level. We still just keep peeling the onions. We still can't experience with our senses the essence of something. And so he said these three things, God, the soul, and the essence of things, he said those things must be relegated to a different realm than the other realm of knowledge, which would be, and I'm getting to my point here, that we're getting to to be able to have knowledge about them, because we can't experience them with the senses. But he said, but we got to assume these things are real, because if there were no God, there would be no morality, there would be no explanation for, how we should live. And that's the transcendental argument that precepts use. But he said we can't know it because we can't experience it. And so what Kant did, and so what he called the realm of the phenomenon, the phenomenal realm. This is a realm where we can experience things with our senses. The realm where God is and where the soul is, he called it the noumenal realm, or the noumena. And he said that is the area that we must posit it, but we can't prove it. So we just take it on faith. And he was considered to be such a genius with his view that almost everybody fell dead at his feet and said, yeah, you're right. The theologian said, basically what he did is he took metaphysics off the table for science. Okay. All you can do is study science. That's why everything's materialism now. I believe most of it just goes back to Kant. And so have you ever heard people say, facts are those things that you can experience, but your morals and your religion, that's like, it's personal. It's up here. You can't, test it or anything like that. And so they made this separation. I don't know if you ever heard of Francis Schaeffer.
Yeah.
Okay, so he had called with what the two-story house, and he said, here you got the lower story, which is like science, and up here is your religion or your faith and your morals are up here. And his whole desire was to say these things are basically, on the same level. But anyway, it's funny because Francis Schaeffer was a presuppositionalist, which the presuppositionalists basically fell dead at Kant's feet too and said, yeah, you can't prove God, so you got to presuppose him. And it's an what do you call it? It's a undefeatable argument, but it's logically fallacious. So what good is that? But anyway.
They seem to draw this distinction between vicious and virtuous circularity, where there's something about the way they do it that they think makes it not fallacious, but I've never really seen a coherent explanation as to what that is.
Okay, let me tell you where they go wrong on that, because they said everybody argues circularly. For example, when I started out our conversation, I said, my mind just left me for a sec there. When I started out this conversation, I said, I need two presuppositions. All right, I said logic and sense perception, and they'll say, see, you are arguing circularly as two, because you have to presuppose these, because in order to prove logic, you've got to use logic, and so you just have to accept sense perception just as a reality. I can't really verify that. I've got to use it in order to verify it. So they would say, so you have sense perception and we have God. But here's the problem. I just learned this recently. Kant, in part of his epistemology, he had sensation. He had the categories of the mind, like the law of non-contradiction and just truth. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, and some triangulars. All this geometry.
That was synthetic a priori was one of the examples he gave for synthetic a priori.
That's right. Mathematics.
Yeah.
Or was what? Yeah, you can.
And then that was distinct from analytic a priori, which means the subject is contained within the predicate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So. So an analytic statement would be a tautology, like a triangle has three sides or something like that. But a synthetic a priori would be like 2 + 2 is 4, or 4 + 1, or 3 + 1 is 4. That would be, he would call that a synthetic a priori, which was controversial. And so, what was I talking about?
You were just going to describe why they're wrong when they try to draw this distinction.
Oh, the presuppositionals, yeah. So the precepts will say, so for Kant, so you had to have the categories of the mind, you have to have sensation, and then you've got to have the pure intuitions of space and time. Those are the containers that hold our experience, and without space and time, we can't really make any sense of anything. We just got to accept those as realities. So what Van Til did, I just learned this not that long ago, is he switched space and time and just said, well, I just use God. And the problem is space and time are not material propositions. They are the containers for the propositions, for the things that we need to hold it. And similarly, when I say logic and sense perception, those are instrumental causes. Those are not material propositions. They're like, I learned all this stuff from R.C. Sproul. And so if you listen to this stuff, you're just going to hear all this stuff. I've got it from it. But he said, the law of non-contradiction is like the policeman on the beat. It doesn't have any content in it. It just tests propositions to see if they're valid, if they're coherent, if they make sense. So that's an instrumental presupposition. But the presuppositionalist is saying, I presuppose God. That is a material proposition. It's not a means to gain understanding. It is the material of itself that you're proposing. That's why it violates the law of non-contradiction. So they say they have a virtuous circle because they're starting with God, who's the foundation for everything. And I say that is not that is committing an informal fallacy. And by saying that we need logic and sense perception, it commits no fallacy. Nobody has ever accused that of begging a question, because those are instruments by which I test the material that people say. Okay.
Right. That's why I don't really buy this claim that everyone is engaged in circular reasoning. I do think it would be circular to an extent to try to, prove the reliability of reason using reason or something like that. But that's not what I'm trying to do. I don't think that's what people, at least people who I think about these things carefully, aren't really trying to do that. We are just taking it for granted, maybe taking it as, say, a properly basic belief that reason is reliable. And it's only circular. It's only circular if you try to prove it using reason, right? So
no, it's only circular if you got to make sure it's in the right category. When
okay.
I say that I am accepting logic, are you familiar with Aristotle's fourfold causality?
No.
Okay, I feel so funny because I every conversation I have to say the same things. If somebody listens to me and say, "Hey, he's an idiot. He knows about 10 facts and he just repeats them," but Aristotle had this fourfold causality, and what he said is he used the example of a sculptor making a sculpture, and he said there are 4 categories to causality, basic, and actually there's like.
Oh, you're talking about like the efficient and material cause. I'm familiar with that. The distinction there. The other two I'm not aware of.
Okay, so the material cause is the granite out of which he's making the statue. The efficient cause is the sculptor himself, who's bringing forth the image out of the block of granite. But a subcategory of efficient cause is the instrumental cause. Well, that'd be the hammer and a chisel that he is using. Those are usually, secondary in their causal relationship, and they're dependent upon the efficiency in order to get it done. And then you've got the final cause, which would be the reason for which it's made, if the king commissioned it or whatever. And then the formal cause is the instructions that he has, the thing that's bringing it, the information that's bringing it to the final cause. It might be something in his mind, or he might have written it down or something like that. Those are the blueprints of what something is happening. And so when you're using logic, it's an instrument for inquiry. But when you're saying God exists, that's the material of the argument itself. And that's why it violates the informal fallacy. Everybody knew that until recently. I mean, I so struggle with presuppositionals, and I have a lot of friends that are presuppers, and they get upset. Like, I'll bang into heads with James. James White is?
Oh, yeah.
I love him. He's a wonderful guy, very intelligent. He does not like me too much.
You've dialogued with him about this stuff?
No, not really.
Oh.
I mean, on Twitter a little bit, but he's just like his Rich, his producer.
No.
The guy that produces his show just blocked me yesterday. Oh. It's not much dialogue for that, but anyway, but it's so patently obvious that somehow the church missed out on the glory of begging the question for 2,000 years until Van Til came along in 1927 and wrote his dissertation. But to me, it's amazing. These otherwise very intelligent, wonderful theologians. James White's not really consistent. I always say he wears the lapel pin of presuppositionalism, but he doesn't act like it. A more consistent precept would be Psi 10 Bruggencate. Because if you really believe that all men know God, the triune God of Scripture, without any external evidence, then all you need is all you need to do is to call them to repentance. You don't need to give any evidence whatsoever, because they already know it. So a consistent, and I've never seen a completely consistent presuppositionalist, but Psi is closer to it, and that's why people so despise him, because he just plays games, with.
So you don't take Romans 1 the same way he does.
No.
So
I believe that Romans 1. Now, we do have something in common. I believe there's a sensus divinitatis. We all know there's a God. I believe the 10 Commandments are written on our heart. If you notice throughout history, almost all civilizations center around a 7-day work week. And I think that, but I don't think it's something you can go and read it. And that's how the precepts treat it. It's almost like you can read something. Yeah. I can go and that I'm supposed to, we all know that life matters, that existence is special. And that's at base with
Paul says that I would not have known what it is to covet had the law not said, you shall not covet, in Romans 7, right? So it's curious why he would say that if it was written on our hearts.
Well, he says, yeah, but he also affirms that in Romans 2. He says that that all men know that there is a law, And so he said, I would not know about coveting specifically as a proposition until he reads it. And then he says in Romans 7, when I read it, it killed me. In other words, I already knew that, but when it came and it was clearly written, to me in the cognitive atmosphere, it kills him. In the cognitive realm, I would say. So, so presuppositionalists, they want to treat it as if it is like you're reading the Bible. You know that, and it's not like that. But Romans 1, if you read it, it's talking about a mediated knowledge. God reveals himself through creation. That's a mediated knowledge. Now, what they want to say is that God has revealed it to them, but they don't read the next verse, and it says, God has made it manifest to them through what has been made. And so,
that's a good point. I've thought about that. It seems to imply that it's not really innate, even if you can deduce God's existence a priori, or maybe that would be a posteriori. I don't know. It seems to imply that it's not innate if you're inferring God's existence through what has been made, right?
No. I think, in creation, that is a mediated knowledge. What it's basically saying is, you're not self-existent. And when I'm arguing with people, when I say argue, I mean dialoguing with people on this, all I argue is Romans 1 and Romans 2. Romans 1 is that we know we're not self-existent, and dependent existence cannot exist independently by definition. Okay, if the entire universe is dependent, it would have to be dependent independently, and that would violate the law of identity. That's if you boil Romans 1 down to that, in strictly philosophical terms, that's what it's saying. Romans 2, the moral law, is saying that we all know that existence matters. And we don't know why. The atheist can't tell you, well, they can contradict themselves. I'll say, is there objective value to life? And they say no. And I say, well, why do you act like it is? Well, it's valuable to me. And I say, yeah, but the question is, why? How do you justify that? How do you give an account for your valuing existence when you've been determined that way? How can you be determined indeterminately? Or how can you have purpose instantiate in you unintentionally? That doesn't make any sense. Again, you're violating the law of identity. You're saying unintentionality is intentional. That doesn't make any sense. But that's for me, Roman. I've boiled them down to the most basic way that I can explain it. So Romans 1 says we know we're not self-existent. Romans 2 says that we know that existence matters, and we've got to get a justification for that. And some people, the best answer I've gotten from atheists is it's an emergent property, which is not an answer. You're just saying,
what's an emergent property?
Intentionality or value, to value the fact that our because to value something is to intend something. Intention is something that only mind can do. And if there's an objective property of mind, then it must be unchanging if it's objective, which goes back to the unchangeableness of God, and is a necessary quality of ultimate reality. But, and, I don't know if you heard me say that people mock me when I say this, but like Pine Creek was saying that he was making fun of me because I said I've never lost argument. I'm not saying like I'm super smart or anything. I'm saying this argument has never, I've been doing this 13 years. I've never seen a viable rebuttal to the argument. People will mock
me. Just laughing at there, and I could be wrong, is just the idea that statement is so obviously not coming from an unbiased perspective, right? And I mean, even if you're right, even if you have never lost an argument, which I don't know, this is my first meeting.
I may have lost every argument I had, but I just haven't perceived it.
What's that?
I may have lost every argument I've ever had, but I just haven't perceived it. So I could be wrong.
I think when people say that type of thing, one, it kind of just displays like a lack of humility, but also it just seems like it's coming from the fact that somebody would think that a statement like that has value suggests that they don't recognize the subjectivity involved in evaluating winning and losing. But I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong. I mean, you could have great arguments. But it's just one of those things where, yeah, like when I listen to, like, it seems like the people who are and this kind of gets back to my question, which I'm not sure, maybe you answered and I missed it, but I was asking, what do you think it is that the other philosophers, theistic philosophers, are missing that you understand when it comes to achieving certainty or not certainty, sorry, proof?
Moving towards certainty,
yeah,
or a greater degree of certainty than they do. Well, and that's what I was explaining Kant for, and I got sidetracked there. So Kant is a watershed of philosophy, all right, and Kant also said whatever comes out of his, they call this Kant's sausage grinder of knowledge. You've got sense perception, you've got the categories of the mind, you've got pure intuitions of space and time, and out of that comes knowledge. But he just calls knowledge a judgment. It's just something you make in here. You don't know if it corresponds to you outside of yourself. So with Descartes, everything went on the inside, and so all we have is conjecture outside of ourselves at a very high degree. And so all of these men, I would assert, are living under the boot, if you will, of Immanuel Kant. They have accepted what he says. And one of the things that Kant said was, and here's the thing, either Paul is right or Kant is right. They both can't be right, because Paul says that people can know God, and Kant said you can't. And Kant actually was a Christian. He was a German pietist. And but he was also very mystical. Pietists are very mystical people. So he wasn't really based very much in the Bible with his faith. And he also was trying to protect religion from, it's so funny, just like the precepts are trying to protect religion from, from reason or whatever, or philosophy. And from my perspective, I have nothing to be afraid of. If it's true, it's true. And, I don't have anything to fear. So my answer to that is virtually all of the philosophers today have accepted Kant's premises. And what Kant said is, he said, how do we know that the realm that God is in corresponds to the realm that we are living in? And my perspective on that is that he's violating the principle of parsimony, or Occam's razor. He's adding complexity to the situation when it's not warranted. There's no reason we should say, there's no reason for us to be forced to say that there's no correspondence to God's, how he is, and to us. Now, there is necessarily the law of non-contradiction.
Are you talking about the noumenal phenomenal distinction there when you say he's adding complexity?
Well, when Kant makes a statement that we can't know God because we don't know that the noumenal realm corresponds to the phenomenal realm, there's no reason to add that complexity to the argument, and he's doing that, and it's cheating. So so that's my biggest problem with Kant. And so all these people have done that. And Peter Boghossian the other day said something. He said he was lamenting the fact that nobody values philosophy. I don't remember exactly what he said. And I said, why would people be interested? Or I'm saying, it used to be said that philosophy, this is what Plato said, philosophy, the purpose of philosophy is to save the phenomena of existence. Okay. We are here for salvation. That's what we're trying to do. And I don't mean Christian salvation, just anybody. Atheists are trying to save the phenomenon of existence. Everything you do. We're having this conversation right now to save the phenomenon of existence. Okay. And I said, why would people, philosophy used to value or be defined by saving the phenomenon of existence, but now philosophy means I don't know. And why would anybody be interested in learning a discipline that all it can give you is I don't know? The very fact that these philosophers always had this tentativeness and that they can't make any assertions about anything of significance, I think is a result of the fact that we have taken everything from reality of metaphysics and everything outside of ourselves and put it all in here, and everything's a judgment. We can't really say anything about reality. And it has brought us to a place where I always joke about this, that a degree in philosophy now will be the greatest prerequisites for you to flip burgers at McDonald's. It's considered useless. Yeah. But let me finish real quick. We're coming to a point now where we're having a renaissance in Christianity. The Reformed Baptists, especially my particular denomination, are recapturing these old categories of pre-Kantian, like I was talking about the prosopological stuff. I don't know much about it because I'm just learning it, but it's a way of thinking that was lost in the Enlightenment, and we're just now rediscovering. Just like the doctrine of God is terrible among really good theologians say they're really bad on doctrine of God, it's because Kant was saying you can't do metaphysics. It's a noumenal realm. And everybody said, okay, the Christians said, that's fine. Just give us our Bibles and we'll entrench in our Bibles. And that's what precept is to steroids. And it used to be theology was the queen of the sciences and philosophy was her handmaiden. The church greatly valued the work. Like Augustine was a Neoplatonist before he was a Christian. And he said Plato got so many things right. He was amazed. And he said, and he synthesized Platonic thought with Christianity. That doesn't mean Christianity came in subservience to Plato, but it does mean that Plato helped in theology because the way that he explained things is right. Plato had the ultimate reality. The ultimate reality is the ultimate good. There is a perfect instantiation of everything that informs everything on the earth. That would be ideas in the mind of God. And then Aquinas came along and learned about Aristotle through the Muslims. The Muslims had a renaissance before we did. And Aristotle brought this quantum leap to theology as well in the Middle Ages. But then when the Enlightenment came and Kant came along, everybody threw that out the window. Oh, we don't need philosophy. We don't need all these things like that. And now the church has become, the reason the church is the butt right now instead of the head, I believe, is this. And also dispensationalism, which basically says that Jesus is coming back in my lifetime, so I don't need to educate myself. Those two things have just plagued the church since the Enlightenment. And now we're having a renaissance and where we can talk about these things. And to me, presuppositionalism represents the very worst of all that stuff. And yet some of the greatest theologians of our day are preceptors. And I just want to grab them by the lapels and say, wake up. But they don't
I would think, there's a couple points here. So for one is that I think when I listen to like some of the top apologists, I get the impression that they're saying we can know God, but they might have more of like a fallibilist conception of what knowledge is. And so it doesn't require certainty. But also I do see something in common between your view and the preceptors, and that's kind of your value of, I'm not going to say certainty, but
yes. No, you're absolutely right. That's okay. What's so weird. It's so funny, but I don't use informal fallacy to get there. That's the difference, which is interesting. I mean, it's funny. I have some things really in common with precept, and I'm Reformed, and precepts are always Reformed too. They're Calvinistic, and the evidentialists are almost always Arminian. They have a different, theological.
That's so interesting, isn't it? I've never understood why that is. Like, why I don't see anything about like the precept methodology that's incompatible with Arminianism, and yet
it's because it was invented by the neo-Calvinists of the Netherlands, Abraham Kuyper and
Van Til and Bonson.
Mainly Van Til. Van Til's the one that invented it. Bonson was his most able exegete, that interpreted him. But that's because its beginning was there, and it sounds super pious, and I understand why people get excited about it. But when you really analyze it with your mind and with the Bible, it's just tripe. It's just sloppy. I can't stand to read Van Til because he's orthodox in what he says, or he's just a weird innovator with coming up with these wacky things.
I tried to read Van Til one time, and it was just the most arcane. Just I could not get past one page.
I can't either.
So hard to read.
I know, I can't either. I've got several of his books, and it's just like I can't stand to read them in any length. I'll read some of his books, but and it's funny because he wrote a book. I've got the book Christianity and Idealism, where he supposedly critiques Kant idealism, but actually, and it's basically just a compilation of his early but he wrote God and the Absolute, which was his 1927 Princeton doctoral dissertation, and that's where basically the precept came in. And I've got a quote on it here where he just basically says, well, we can't know God, so therefore we got to presuppose him. It's like Kant, he was speaking Kant all over the place, Yeah. And it's like, they don't realize it. They think that they're critiquing Kant, but they're really children of the Enlightenment, thinking that they're super duper Reformed, historic Christians. And they're not on that point. And it's so frustrating.
Yeah. Well, so I guess, okay, so there's two directions we can go here. And we can talk about how to make the jump from theism to Christianity. And we can talk about how to get from, my agnosticism to some sort of theism. I suspect you're probably more interested in the latter conversation.
Well, that's the more important one. And the reason that I focus on those is because, like I said, you mentioned, I said I've never lost.
I got to take this call really quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll be back in 1 minute.
Yeah, no problem. Did I offend you, jungle jargon, and you left? Are you still there? I guess you're still there. I don't read comments while I'm talking.
Okay, I'm back. Just so you know, I've got about an hour left, so hope that's.
Oh, well, like a half hour is all I got. So.
Oh shoot. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we better make it productive. You were sorry. You were saying.
So, from my perspective, again, you made a statement earlier. I don't remember what it was, but it said something like, it sounds kind of arrogant to have such certainty when there are such more intelligent people that are much more tentative with their assertions about such things. And the question I have to that is, okay, where did I make a mistake?
Yeah. So just to be clear, I wasn't saying that that makes your statement arrogant. I was just making an observation that it seems to me like there's kind of a correlation between how knowledgeable people are about. I guess it's sort of like the Dunning-Kruger effect, and I don't want to say you are like example.
Oh, there's a video on me with Dunning-Kruger. You know who Bert Poole is?
I do. Yeah, I remember him back from the old Google Plus days, back like 7 years ago.
Did you know me then?
I remember you from back then.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I don't think we ever were in a hangout, and I don't know if it's been so many years since I watched that stuff. I kind of like took a break from all these kind of questions, and I'm sort of just now coming back to it. But
sure.
Yeah, I remember you from back then.
Bert made a video. I don't even think I've watched it, but Bert made a video about me with my Dunning-Kruger.
Well, anyway,
and actually, Bert is one of my smartest interlocutors. He's one of my favorites. He's a very sharp guy. He's a lot smarter than a lot of people who have a philosophical education. He doesn't have any training.
Yeah. I was just making an observation that it seems like there's a correlation between the level of confidence people express in their beliefs and how knowledgeable they are about certain subjects, like philosophy, especially. Not to say that you can't be justified in having extremely strong confidence. And as far as where you're wrong, I don't know. You're gonna have to lay your view out for me because like I said, it's been 7 years since I've even watched your stuff. So I don't know. You want to start there?
Sure. Let's just start with my normal argumentation. I kind of gave it, but not very maybe succinctly as I normally do. But I say if something exists, there are only 4 possibilities: either some illusion, or it's self-created, self-existent, or it's created by something that is self-existent. Okay, and we've already gone over that it's an illusion. We know it's not an illusion because we're asking a question. So you might be an illusion, but I know that I, the inquirer, because I've granted law of non-contradiction, I've granted basic sense perception to know that I exist. That's all I need. I don't even need you. I don't need anything else. All I need is me. And so I know that I exist. So it's not an illusion. Everything's not an illusion. You might be, but I'm not. And then secondly, it is self-created. In order for something to create itself, it would need to be before it is, which would be a violation of the law of non-contradiction, which you've already granted. So we know that can't be it. Self-creation is irrational. It's like an effect without a cause, which is causality is analytically true. Does that make sense to you? It's an analytical statement. Every effect must have a cause. Is like
you're saying by the definition of the word cause, it entails effect. And the definition of the word effect entails cause.
Right. So if you talk about an effect without a cause or something, anything that changes without cause is irrational. It's not possible to do that. So that's why self-creation is an impossibility. And even though, what's his name, Stephen Hawking in The Nature of Space and Time said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. I'm not sure exactly what he means by that, but anyway, it didn't begin. I mean, well, I believe it did begin, but it didn't begin itself. So So it's not an illusion. It's not self-created. It's self-existent. And this is probably the one that most people appeal to that I engage with. They say that the universe, why not just say that the universe exists? You say that God exists. Well, why not just the universe exist? Well, the problem is that the universe is changing, and anything that is changing is an admixture of act and potency. In other words, it's always changing, even though we see continuity in with us. Are you familiar with Heraclitus and Parmenides? They were the early pre-Socratics, and Parmenides said, change is an illusion, and Heraclitus said everything is changing. And if everything is changing it all the time, then it's really nothing. But we have this sensation that we know things really are changing. And Parmenides said that there's only two categories, being and non-being. So for something to change, it would need to pass out of being and then come back into being to be something new, just me, that I changed this moment here. And so he said it's an illusion. And that's one of the things that brought skepticism when Socrates came on the scene and kind of saved the phenomena. I don't know what synthesis he was bringing exactly for that, but he's credited with saving the Greek or the Western or the Greek, the whole entire area, the realm of the kingdom at that time. So we know that anything that changes has to be acted upon something outside of itself that's already actualized, bringing the potential out into the actual sense in me. So for example, I always use the example, I'm balding. Okay. And so I'm potentially bald, and to be actually bald, I have to be acted on something outside of myself, or some of the components that make me up. Anything that's a composite needs a composer, because when something is composed, it's not what it is until it's put together. And if you want to say at the very basic substance of an individual for a human is I'm a substantial form of humanity. This is what Aristotle would say, and I have existence that is given to me. Okay, so I'm an admixture at base of existence and essence. I have the essence of human, and existence is given to me. My essence is my whatness, and my existence is my whetherness. Whether I am or not, and I'm given those things together. So something outside of me that's already actualized had to bring me to this state of being that I'm in. And even as I'm changing all the time, there's got to be something that is actual, that is acting upon me. Because if everything starts out potential, in other words, if you say everything is pure change, then what you've got is basically, to be potential is not to exist. It's not to be actual. And if you want to say everything started out as potential existence, then it started out as nothing. It's the same as saying that self-creation. So anything that changes has to be dependent by definition, and it can't be self-existent. Okay. So it's not an illusion. It's not self-created. It's not self-existent. And the only one that's left is it's created by something that is self-existent.
So would you say that something can be changeless and also have potential, or is that a contradiction?
That's contradiction, because it's a part of its being. Potential means to change by definition.
So it sounds intuitive to me to say God had the potential to create the universe, right? When in the state in which the universe didn't exist, seems like you could say God had the potential to create this universe. He had the potential to create a wide variety of different universes. I guess that might depend on your view of whether God has libertarian free will, but
yeah,
is that a wrong way to think about it?
Yeah, like that. William Lane Craig would say something like that. And my question is, this is not really what you're asking, but it's like, well, what is there some store that God goes to where he's contingent upon it to choose whichever way? I don't understand how deliberation would act for pure being. God doesn't think. Remember, I said earlier, I said there's got to be a correspondence. I didn't believe Kant's view that God in no way corresponds to us. We don't know if he does or not, but God doesn't think like us. In other words, I think logic corresponds to God, and that logic brings coherence out of chaos, and it unifies diversity. But the only way we can think is through change. Okay, we predicate. We have the subject and we have the predicate in our sentence. God doesn't think like that. He doesn't move through his thinking like that. So you could say, and people want to say, well, if you say that God, how is it that creation is not necessary as well? They call it modal collapse. But there's a distinction between absolute necessity and hypothetical necessity. I think we are hypothetically necessary. From my perspective, I don't see how the world could have been any other way than it is, because again, what is God deliberating? Is there some kind of reality? All that is in God is God. All that there was before creation, from our perspective, was just God, and God was not contemplating ideas that somehow existed outside of his mind that he was, going through. And even his decree and even his creation is eternal. And this presents kind of a conundrum for Christians, because you'd have to. This is Bert's argument, complaint against what I'm saying, is that, well, there must have been a time when God actually created, where he moved from potential creator to actual creator. And I would say that would be true from our perspective as we understand it. But from God's perspective, he must be eternal creator, because if you want to say that God is moved from act and potency, then everything explodes. You have to deny the law of non-contradiction again. Are you familiar with the principle of explosion? Aristotle, I think.
Anything follows from contradiction or something like that.
Once you deny L and C, then everything explodes. Yeah, you could say it. You could say L and C no longer holds. Well, yeah, but it actually does hold. But it doesn't hold at the same time. I mean, you can't make a statement about anything once you do that.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear on this, because like a lot of contingency arguments that I'm familiar with will say, well, there are certain things in the world that are contingent in the modal sense, right? Like a lot of times they'll use an example like this cup, right? This cup could have not existed.
Right.
But it sounds like you're saying, well, okay, there are different ways to understand that. You could say it couldn't have. There was a time, obviously, when it didn't exist. But if we're thinking in the modal sense, you could still think, well, this cup had to exist. It just didn't have to exist at all times, right? So is that the view you would take? Like, would you say that everything in our reality, every person, every leaf, every tree, had to exist? It just didn't have to exist at all times? Because it sounds like you're saying God couldn't have created a different universe than he did, right? So it seems like it follows from that everything is necessary in a sense. Or maybe
from my perspective, I would call that, like a hypothetical necessity. And I could be wrong about this. I'm not, I make teeth for a living, but these are just things that I thought about from my own musings on the idea that there is true free will within our realm that we can have. I can truly choose to lift this or not. And it really was me who was choosing that. But God is sovereign over that. It's kind of like, this is a very weak analogy, but I think it's helpful. You could say the chickens in the chicken coop have liberty to do whatever they want, but the farmer is always ultimately, sovereign over their freedom. And I don't believe God is learning anything. And this is the thing that many of my Arminian friends, want to do. That's ridiculous, because if God is learning something, then he's contingent upon us in order to gain knowledge, and he's not God again. You got to start with the most important things. Let me say something real quick. So this is what's so important about recapturing from Kant. By gaining the discipline of metaphysics, everything blossoms like a beautiful garden. And I'm talking about theology, and I'm talking about philosophy as well. And this is what's so exciting to me about what we're having, this Renaissance, returning back to an older way, because right now we're not allowed to ask why for anything. I don't know, the Darwinian synthesis, they did away with the formal and the final causal within, actually it's early modern physics with Newton's physics, because Aristotle had a physics and it was terrible. It was just not good. And so what happened when Newton came along is we began to just look at this piece of matter, how this piece of matter, they interact with each other. Everything was just brought to the material level. And so now, where we're at right now, we're not allowed to ask about what's good. We're not allowed to ask about purpose. We're not allowed to ask about beauty. Now, people have it, but the atheists, for example, they just emote these things. They just say, I have this emotion. I have this emotion that my life matters, but I can't give a reason, which is really ironic when you think about it, how they ridicule religious people, and yet the ones who truly have no justification for living their lives is the atheist. So it's very exciting for me to see us recapturing these categories. Are you familiar with Ed Fazer?
Yeah.
I like a lot of his stuff. He doesn't have the gospel, but he's a very nice and thoughtful guy. And I'd actually say that Aristotle, or that Thomas Aquinas, has a hylomorphism his I don't know how to explain being in change, and I don't think Aristotle. I think Aristotle's wrong, and I think Thomas was wrong trying to utilize him. Hylomorphism doesn't work because you got to have what's it called, prime matter. Prime matter must be eternal, and that's not compatible with Christianity. In order to being in change. The reason I said that.
With the theologian Ryan Mullins. Have you heard of him?
Yes. He.
I feel like you should have him on your channel and talk about this whole idea of God being timeless and stuff like
because
that.
he's
I don't equipped to offer objections to that.
Well, he's a very smart guy. I don't know that much about him, but I know that he denies a classical theism. I know that. And do you know what I don't even know what is his argument. Do you know? Is it something to do with modal?
He's got a whole book called like The End of the Timeless God, and I've heard him use certain arguments about, like for example, that God's knowledge would have to change because you'd have a state of affairs in which God knows that the universe doesn't exist, and then he knows that the universe does exist. And he fleshes that out very rigorously. I mean, I know I'm sure you've heard that argument before. Mm-hmm. I think I don't know if this is one I've been thinking about, but maybe you can help me resolve this. And I think it's possible that Ryan uses this objection, but it seems to me like, okay, God's got this state of intentionality to create the universe, and that state of intentionality is sufficient to create the universe, right? So like you're familiar with the concept of necessary and sufficient conditions for some effect, right? You've got the sufficient conditions are those that can't fail to produce an effect. And so this is just something I'm wondering about your view is like, if God's if there was no transition from a state in which only the necessary conditions for the universe obtained to a state when the sufficient conditions obtained, right? So one way to explain that would be God hasn't decided to create the universe, and then God does decide to create the universe. That would be like a transition from only necessary conditions to both necessary and sufficient conditions. Mm-hmm. But if there was no transition, there was just this static God with the intention to create the universe, the ability, and all of the sufficient conditions, how could there have been any state of affairs in which God existed and the universe did not? That's something I've never quite understood about this timeless God view. Well, does that make sense? What I'm asking?
Yeah, no, that's probably the best question, I think. The challenge to my perspective. But the thing is that, again, whenever we start these things, we got to have the law of non-contradiction. We got to have rational coherence. Okay, and those things and so what happens is, and some people will say that. So knowing that God doesn't change and knowing that God does not think discursively like we do, he doesn't live discursively in any sort of way. When you get up to a certain point, you've got to understand that there are certain incommunicable attributes of God, and that's not an escape hatch, but rather it's saying that if God were to share something with me, by definition, it would not be pure actual, it would be contingent. In other words, it would be a becoming because he shared it with me.
You're saying the content of what he's sharing with you would be
any information that he would share with me would necessarily not be the same thing that it is in him. This is why there's so much mystery within classical theism in the Middle Ages. It's like one of the favorite ways of Thomas to speak of God is via negativa. You know, it's just by way of negation. He's invisible. He's immutable. What we do is we have things that we have, and we divest them of the creatureliness that we have. And so it's almost like when they talk about God being the ineffable, well, it's not just because people are wanting to be spiritual. It is truly saying that there are certain attributes which necessarily, by logic, cannot be communicated. And so God is living in a realm that is above and beyond. And I'm not saying that it's an unbridgeable gap like Kant would say, but I am saying that it requires analogical language. Are you familiar with analogical language?
Yeah, so you've got like equivocal, univocal, and analogical. Right. Yeah, I'm familiar with the distinction.
So Thomas, I think, was kind of really cleared this up. Hey, Untangelo. And so you've got to have this, and a lot of people don't want to say, well, a lot of my friends or people that I know say, well, no, if it's analogical, then it's not real. But the problem is like, for example, you see in the Bible, you see saying it repented God that he created man. And then it'll say, I am not a man that I should change. Where you have these seeming contradictory statements. God works all things together according to the counsel of his will. And then we see that man having, free choice and things like that. God has to use, that's what the whole thing of anthropomorphisms or anthropopathisms. God doesn't, this is one of the, again, in my circles, there's a big debate going on impassibility, whether God experiences emotions like we do. And I'm a 1689 Baptist, and our confession says God is without body, parts, or passions. And those are three separate things. It's not body parts. It's body parts, which would be metaphysical parts, or passions. And passions are emotional states that we're moved to a new state of being because of something that acts upon us. My passions are, if I see a pretty woman or something, I might be drawn toward her. Or if I see something ugly or frightful, because of that, I react to that. And people want to say, and so God uses words like he has those kind of passions, and God is angry and all those things. Those are analogical language, because I think Calvin said that God, as it were, lisps to us as we speak to a child. When we talk to a child, we accommodate our language that, although it corresponds to what we're saying, it's not technical and it's not exact. Yeah. So using those terms, enables us to interact, but not in a completely, and so that's what God has to do. He has to lower himself, and given him, he's parted the waters with the blast of his nostrils. The crazy televangelists say God's got a big nose and he lives up, it's like, no, that's not what it's saying,
So with analogical language, or with any analogy, there's a point of contrast and a point of similarity, right? So right. I'm very curious to, I wish we had more time, but I'm very curious to understand, like when the Bible talks about God getting angry in response to human beings doing things, if we're going to understand that analogically, then we should be able to flesh out exactly where the point of contrast is and where the point of similarity is. And it seems like, well, it's hard to say that God isn't acting or responding to human behavior, because it's very clear that he is, right? He gets angry at David for, right. Whatever. And so it seems like it fulfills the response criteria, right? Or it's similar in that respect, but maybe you have a different way of understanding it. And also, like, as far as God getting angry, is it just that God's experiencing emotion, but it's just similar, but not the same as what we feel when we feel anger? Or how do you understand that?
Well, I think that, again, we got to say that God cannot be moved to a new state of being. But if there is he's using language that we can understand, that can enable us to know as creatures something that might correspond to him. Because anger is a relative property. Okay, God didn't get angry before creation, but love. Or same thing with sin. Sin is a parasitic reality. There's no such sin as just the want of good. It's not a positive element in and of itself. It's kind of like a parasite. It can only without the good, there is no evil. All right, but so God does not. You know what the Bible says about God regarding love?
God is love.
God is love. He doesn't have love, but you say that God is justice. He doesn't have justice. For me, love is an accidental property. I'm still Trey, whether I love or not. So I move in and out of the state of being of love and can go into hatred or fear or whatever like that. And I'm still me. But God, this is one of the things. If God has accidental properties, which is one of the implications of impassibility, if you want to say God is passible, then there's something outside of him that he's participating in. That's he's moving in and out of this. And whatever that is, he's contingent to that. And also it means that he's no longer simple. He's made up of these composite parts of moving into love and moving out of love. And, he's like us. He's a creaturely thing. That's why these doctrines of metaphysics are so important, and they've been so helpful to me. Again, there's an element of mystery there, but that doesn't mean that we are left in a complete dark. But I think we have to accept this doctrine of analogical language if we are to have any kind of Well, the Bible just uses it, though. I mean, it's just very clear that that's the terminology it's using. And that's why philosophical theology is so important, which so many of my opponents that are kind of biblicists, they get all offended at that. And I'm like, you guys don't even realize that the historic church has been doing this for, 1,800 years until, just recently. So,
Well, just to highlight a point of similarity between us, I mean, it seems like you conceptualize God as being wholly other to us in a sense.
No.
Oh, sorry. I thought that's. I mean, I've heard the term. I thought it sounds like you're describing God as being very far beyond our comprehension.
Yes, but not wholly other. That's
okay.
And some of my friends, even guys that I really respect, they'll say that. R.C. Sproul used to dog on this. You know who Karl Barth is?
No.
He's a very famous theologian in the 20th century, and he came up with this concept of holy otherness, and he was very much into Kant too as well. I think in the way he was very mystical. He's a neo-orthodoxy. He said that Christ is an encounter. You know Dietrich Bonhoeffer?
No.
Oh, he was a famous guy that tried to kill Hitler. He helped the Jews in World War II. He was a theologian, but anyway, he was a disciple of Barth. Evangelicals really like him though. But anyway, just thinking about him. But a lot of these guys came out along and they said God is wholly other, and what it did is it gave rise to the theothanatology movement. And I think it was in the 70s. The cover of Time magazine said the cover said God is dead, and what it does, it's theothanatology is a God is dead movement. Basically, what it says is if you say God is wholly other, that's a universal statement, then there's no way for us to have any relationship to him whatsoever. Just say he has a different quiddity, a different being than us, but I just object to saying wholly other because that's too far. But you want to say God
misunderstood the technical.
He's not like a perfect human. He's not like, because again, I'm passable. I move in and out of states of being. So there is a point of analogy to us in that justice is something that is from God, and it is revealed to us in an accommodated way as we see our courts work today, for example, and that existence matters and things like that. So, but it's just not to the degree of exactitude that I would have in talking about it with you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess maybe I misunderstood the use of that term. I guess because I've heard like
no, they don't know. People use it sloppily all the time.
Yeah. But I was just pointing out that like a point of similarity is I feel that whatever explain, like I said in the beginning, I do have believe that there's some necessary foundation to reality. I just feel like it's just I'm skeptical that we have much epistemic access to it, and I feel like whatever it is very far beyond our comprehension. And so I'm sympathetic to what you're saying. Like when I brought up the dilemma of like how could there be any state in which God exists and the universe didn't. And I mean, I didn't, like you say, it's a very difficult problem, but it seems to me like every perspective or every viewpoint or worldview has these types of problems. And so, that's not in and of itself a reason to think that any particular worldview is irrational or that somebody's irrational for believing a worldview just because it has certain dilemmas. Now we can go and analyze further and find out, well, which worldview removes the most amount of mystery, but also maintains, which world we can still assess the relative, I guess, coherence of different worldviews and things like that. But I'm skeptical of the idea that there's any worldview that's like completely free of problems,
Well, and I don't think I've presented something that creates. Did I say that it's reasonably necessary that there be incommunicable between pure being and actum potency composite beings? Does that seem reasonable to you?
Does it seem reasonable that say it one more time?
Okay. Does it seem reasonable that I would posit that there must be an element of mystery because there necessarily must be incommunicable attributes from pure actuality to contingent being? Because you can't share it.
Well,
because if you share it, it becomes potentially something that is actual. So in other words, I don't.
I'm gonna have to think about that. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I still don't say that. I don't have any weakness in what I'm saying. If you're saying that you must be able to comprehend all things and in fullness, yes, you can't do that, but that's an unreasonable standard to set. It's kind of like
So there are things that are okay. Is everything uncommunicable? Because surely you believe that God has communicated certain things to us, right?
no, but I think that there are certain things about God that have to have accommodated language, and they cannot be communicated because we are dependent creatures who have to learn by change. That's the only way we can learn.
Okay, and if we're assessing what types of things fall into each, let's just say I grant that. I'll have to think about what you're saying, but let's say I grant that, and then how do we go about assessing what types of things fall into that category and what types of things fall into the category of things that can be communicated?
Well, it's going to be things that necessarily entail pure actuality, that need to be understood, like emotions. All right. We know, for example, you said that you believe there's some kind of ultimate reality. You don't really know what it is. But let me use this as an example. Are you familiar with the principle of proportionate causality?
Is that the principle that says that whatever exists in a cause in some way exists in, or excuse me, whatever exists in an effect some way exists in the cause, or something like that?
Yeah. So we have the category. I think this might be one of Aristotle's categories, although I haven't studied it. We have the category of relationality, right? And relationality is something that only persons can have, right? All right, so that doesn't not logically follow then whatever that ultimate reality must be relationally personal. Relational and personal. In other words, what do we experience here? In other words, it can't be an impersonal force, because then we would have something that our cause does not have.
So it feels like if I apply that consistently, I would say, well, if the effect, say God creates an effect that's physical, then physicality must be in some way inherent in the cause.
Physicality is an imperfection.
Oh,
because it's dependent.
Okay, so
not that it's evil.
Is it analytically true that that things that are dependent are imperfect, or is that synthetic?
Well, things that, did you say matter?
I asked, is it analytically true, or is it synthetically true that things that are dependent are imperfect?
Oh, dependent. Things that are dependent cannot be all that they are. It's a definitional, it would have to be analytically true.
So you're just using the word imperfect to mean something.
When I say imperfect, I'm saying that something that is perfect is not fallible. It's not something that is dependent on something else. It cannot be corrupted.
Because when I hear that word perfect, it almost sounds kind of normative to me, and it sounds like when I understand something to be perfect, I understand it as being judged relative to a standard. And so I'm curious, like what the standard would be for saying that something, let's say something that's not dependent is perfect, like, or something. Yeah, it's not immediately obvious to me that perfection has anything to do with dependence or independence, but maybe I have to think about it more.
Well, something that is dependent is not equal to the thing upon which it depends. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, that's kind of what I'm saying.
Okay.
It's of a dependent order. It's not like for God doesn't have all these attributes. Like from my perspective, God doesn't have all these properties that are bundled together in one big thing. When I'm talking about justice, I'm just talking about God. When I'm talking about love, I'm just talking about God. And a lot of people have problems with that today, but this is why divine simplicity is really important. And God is the perfection of all that he is. And the example that's used, James Dolezal, whom I recommend, he's really good on these things. He's a Reformed Baptist, but his book, God Without Parts cover, he has a prism with white light going in it and refracted into the colors of the spectrum. And that's what God does with the knowledge of us. In other words, again, it's an analogical language. He accommodates his language in a way that we can understand it. But when understanding God as he is, we can't speak of him as having all these bundles of property, because if God is not one, then he is, in his essence, he can't be God. He's got to be simple, because anything that's composed needs a composer, because it's not what it is until the parts come together.
Yeah, I wish I could make sense of the idea that, like, okay, love, justice, mercy, these things are, we would probably agree these things are distinct. They seem like they're distinct, right? And yet you're saying they're all the same thing. They're all God, right?
They must be in a way that he is. And you get your ad intra and ad extra predications. So you've got God as he relates to himself as he is, and then you've got his ad extra revelation of himself, would be like his economy, the way that he expresses himself to us, which is an accommodated form.
I want to look up these terms for later. Tell me that the first term again that you just
ad intra, ADINTRA,
intra, and then
ad extra.
Ad extra. Okay.
That's the way that God is in and of himself, and the way that God reveals himself to us in this world.
Okay.
And in the first one, ad intra is going to be, again, it's going to be enshrouded for mystery a lot for us, but there are certain things that we can say, like not changing. We can't experience not change.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I might be a concern is when somebody of a different worldview appeals to mystery, I presume, and I haven't listened to a whole lot of your stuff, but I presume you're probably gonna push back against that move, right? Appealing to mystery. And
if
so
it's justified, you have to give a reason for why you can't just use it as a trump card. You've got to actually say, and I've given that. I've said that because certain perfections require to share them would require them to not be a perfection, is a necessary consequence. In other words, it's what logic leads me to. Logic leads me to mystery. But when somebody just wants to say, like Christians all the time, they run really quick to mystery. Oh, that's, why? There's a contradiction in the Bible. Oh, well, we just don't understand those things. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that
you're deriving. What you're saying is you're kind of deriving
right.
logically that this is the type of thing that we shouldn't expect to have an answer to.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where logic leads us. In other words, it's not.
I mean, I feel like people, like maybe an atheist could say the same thing about our limited cognitive faculties and the epistemic barrier between us and whatever is prior to the universe, right?
Well, yeah, they can do that.
What would be the symmetry breaker there?
Anybody. Well, because I'm giving an answer and you're not. If you're an atheist, I'm just saying you in the general sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I'm not forcing you to believe what I believe. Believe whatever
no,
you want.
I know. Yeah,
but,
I mean,
I am giving an answer and you're not. That's the difference.
Yeah, well, I mean, so say somebody says well, I believe there's a necessary being. I just don't. It seems to me the difference is you're specifying one additional attribute, which is this mental properties or intentionality or something like that, whereas the other person is not. And you're appealing to, in order to do that, you're appealing to the law of proportional. What did you say it was?
Proportionate causality.
Law of proportionate causality. Yeah. Okay. So that's something I'll think a little bit more about. But when I think, it seems to me like understanding what I would have to first know exactly what intentionality is, ontologically speaking, before I could maybe derive a conclusion about whether the existence of intentionality in the world entails, assuming that law is correct or that principle is correct. Mm-hmm. Seems like I would need to know more about what intentionality is, whether it's fundamental or not. Because let's suppose for the sake of analysis that intentionality is,
well, let's call it teleology.
Okay. That teleology is comprised of more fundamental parts. Let's say you could go with physicalism or maybe even physicalism could potentially be compatible with the idea that there's like
but physicalism is only contingent, therefore it can't be an ultimate answer. Physicality is change.
Yeah. Okay. Physicalism is contingent, and therefore it can't be. So what I'm saying is, maybe we're talking past each other. What I'm saying is, like, if hypothetically, if our intentionality, which is comprised of physical parts, like, I don't know, some particle or whatever, then it's possible that whatever the fun, like, let's say that matter is composed of something that's even more fundamental than that, right? Mm-hmm. And we just don't know what that is yet. And what if there's a commonality there that satisfies the principle of whatever.
Proportionate causality.
Yeah, I don't know why I keep forgetting. Proportionate causality that satisfies that principle. There's a commonality, like whatever is fundamental, whatever serves as the fundamental basis of reality is fundamentally of comprised of that same thing, but it's not intentionality, because like intentionality would be a particular configuration of that thing. You get what I'm saying? Sorry, maybe I didn't express that very clearly.
Okay, but here's the problem with that, though, because we've got it based. We've got to have two separate categories. You've got to have contingent being, and you've got to have ase being, or self-existent being. All right, you got to have those two. So everything that comes to this contingent, realm, whatever it is, it must be in the ase individual, whatever it may be. And if we are personal and relational,
all right, what does ase mean?
Of itself, self-existent.
Okay.
So you got a non-contingent, or what was the other word I was using? I don't know. But you got to have contingent. If there's contingent being, this is a modus ponens argument. If there is contingent being, there must be non-contingent being, because contingent being cannot be dependent independently. It cannot create itself. It can't be in and of itself. So you always, at very base, you got to have these two things. And if you want to deny that gives us our being, from my perspective, if God were to lift his hand from us right now, people would say, oh, everything would fall apart. No, I believe that we would cease to be. We would just cease existence. It would just pass out of existence altogether. So every moment of our existence must be upheld by him. But from my perspective, and so for us, in order to be able to be lovers, for example, to be relational in that sense, to be a love, you must have a lover and a loved, and that relationality is something that whatever caused me cannot be bereft of. It must be all of the things that we see here in this world. There must be a perfection found in that being in order for us to have it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be. Things don't just emerge out of nothing.
Okay, so this concept of perfection seems to be important to. So the question that I've asked is like, okay, we look around at there are lots of things in the world that you would say are fundamentally different from the primary cause, God, right? Matter is of a completely different ontological.
No, not completely different.
Oh, interesting. Okay, this is helping me understand now. There is a commonality between, because what I'm, and maybe you've explained this, I'm just not understanding, but it's like, it seems like you're saying intentionality is fundamentally different from everything else, in the sense that whatever caused intentionality has to have that attribute of intentionality, but whatever caused, say, water to exist, or trees or planets, doesn't have to have those same attributes of physicality and mass. And so I'm wondering, like, what the difference is. And I could understand from like maybe from a non-physicalist perspective, but if somebody is a physicalist, then there really isn't any ontological difference between intentionality and everything else in the universe. It's all just physical stuff, right? And so it seems like you're picking out this one thing, intentionality, and saying the cause has to have this attribute. But
okay, let's say value.
Okay.
Again, when I say intentionality, value, maybe to be easier to understand this way, does your life matter?
There are a couple different ways I could understand that question, what you mean by that question. One way is to ask, are you asking, do I value my life? And given my understanding of value, that's what I would say is yes, it matters in the sense that I value it. But if you're asking, does my life have this like kind of non-physical property that is intrinsic to the life itself called matter, or called called value? That I'm open to that idea, but it's not clear to me that that's true. The first one seems more intuitive to me, so I leaned that way. And
Sure.
I would answer yes in the sense that I value my life.
Okay, were you determined to do that?
I don't know. I mean, I think that has to do. In order to answer that question, I would have to know if there's indeterminacy when it comes to the chain of causation that preceded my existence, right? So like all of the decisions that led up to me existing, people, having sex and having kids, if there's like quantum indeterminacy involved in that, then the answer would be no. But if everything's determined, then the answer would be yes, right? So I'm not sure
from a physicalist perspective.
Well, even if God's, well, does it matter if?
Well, it sounds to me like you're just saying
determined. I'm not sure if it matters whether physicalism is true. If the question is whether it's determined, maybe you could flesh that out a little more. Tell me.
Well, so that which is determined. So if you want to say, I forgot what I was going to say, something about determination. I don't remember what it was. But you agree that you are determined, and you're not willing to say that which determined you to value existence is purposeful. You're saying that non-purposive something brought the property of value to you.
Well, remember, I'm agnostic, so for me, it's either option is possible. And
but I'm just saying your reason for that, though. I mean, you know, okay. I'm not saying you have to believe this. I'm just saying I'm asking for your justification, because from my perspective, another term is ageris sequitur esse. Work follows being. All right, this is principle, proportionate, cause, kind of the same type of thing. So there's I mean, I always say this. I said, if you drew a Venn circle and you said all the universe were encapsulated in this circle, all right, all reality is in this circle, and it's all unintentional. Okay. Then today, what would you have? We would have unintentionality, because unintentionality is unintentional, not intentional, and it could not intend intention because it's unintentional by definition without violating the law of identity. So,
I don't know if I would say that all reality is unintentional, right? Because I consider myself and my fellow primates to be part of the universe, and that we have intentionality.
That's right? My whole point. By modus ponens, then.
There's like a subset of the universe that has intentionality, and then there's
right, and there's rocks.
So there's a subset that does, and the subset that doesn't. And your question was, is it possible, if I understand correctly, your question was, is it possible for my valuing of my life to be caused by something other than intentionality? Is that what you're asking?
Like, is it possible for rocks to create philosophical societies?
Oh, that seems like a different question. Maybe there's
no, because it's an emergent property. I mean, if that's essentially what you're saying, I think.
Yeah, I mean, rocks are like a particular configuration of matter that it seems to me like, unless panpsychism is true, the rocks, the particular configuration of matter that make up rocks is probably not capable of that. In fact, I'm say to a high degree of confidence, rocks are not capable of that. But I'm not seeing the direct relation between that and the question of, is it possible for non-personal causes or non-intentional causes to bring about intentionality? Because it's just like, I don't see what the symmetry breaker is between that question and like asking, well, is it possible for non-intentional causes to bring about the property of liquidity or something, any kind of other emergent property?
Yeah, liquidity is not something that's necessarily teleological toward a goal.
Yeah, the commonality between the two is they're both emergent properties, right? Not that one. I mean, obviously, it's an analogy, right? There's a point of distinction and a point of similarity. The point of dissimilarity would be the fact that one's intentional and the other is not,
which is the point that matters.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is I would want to know why it is that certain emergent properties like liquidity could come about from non-personal causes, but other emergent properties like intentionality could not come about from non.
Would you be willing to say that intentionality is not physicality?
I want to know what the answer to this question is, but I'm agnostic on the whole physicalism thing. I'm currently reading Josh Rasmussen's book on Can Reason Lead to God? And I'm on this chapter 7 called Foundation of Mind, where he's going into all of the reasons to think that that mental properties are not physical, and he's making some really interesting arguments. One about how it's impossible to analyze first-person experience from a third-person perspective and things like that. And these are definitely pushing me in the direction of non-physicalism when it comes to the mind. But then there are other considerations that make me think that it is physical. And I could go into that if you want. Basically, by the way, it's almost 9. I got about 6 minutes left.
Yeah, okay. I got to go too. I got to leave a long time ago, but that's fine.
I'm enjoying the conversation, though.
Yeah, I am too. Very nice.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's like one of the most difficult questions, but I definitely see the case for non-physicalism. But I guess to lay out one of the things that makes me think it is physical, it's just if the mind is non-physical, it's really weird that first of all, there's the interaction problem, right? But there's a deeper problem, which is why does the interaction seem to be bilateral instead of unilateral? You know, when you consume alcohol, for example, or when you take anesthesia, why does the causality affect the mind?
You mean the physicality?
Say, well, they'll use an analogy of like playing on a broken piano, right? And they'll say, even though you're playing all the right notes, the sound that comes out is incorrect. But that seems wrong. That seems like and I could go into why that is, but what's your thought on this? Have you thought about this, or
are you talking about the relationship between
the question
physical mind and the soul?
The mind is truly independent of physical processes. Why is it that when we ingest?
It's not. I don't think it is.
Okay,
I mean, we are a soul body composite, and there is a relationship between the physicality and the spirituality. For example, we experience pain in our body, and then we have post-traumatic stress disorder that can affect us our whole lives, or something bad happens to us. So there certainly is a relationship between the two. But to say that everything is physical, then there's no me, there's no person making. I mean, hard determinism seems to me the necessary corollary if you want to say physicality is all there is. And again, you can't give a justification for existence either, because everything is dependent, because physicality changes necessarily by definition. And that violates the law of non-contradiction. You didn't make yourself.
Okay. There are a couple of, I guess there are a bunch of different avenues we could go down on that. But just sticking on the philosophy of mind thing, what I'm wondering is why there's a causal connect. Okay. So you said that you do think the mind and the body are fundamentally different substances, right? Or no? Or no?
Substance. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can imagine you can imagine it working two different ways, right? The mind can interact with the body and cause the body to move in certain ways. But what's curious to me is why the causal connection goes the other way as well. Like, why does affecting the brain actually affect our consciousness if our consciousness is an independent substance? when you take I can understand taking anesthesia and that cutting off the connection between the mind and the brain such that the mind can no longer interact with the body. But why is it when certain things happen in the brain and you go to sleep that the mind seems to shut down? It just seems like that's a prediction that's more expected under physicalism. And all of the explanations for it just seem, well, they seem a little bit ad hoc. And so that's one thing that puzzles me.
But from the Christian perspective, that we are body soul composites, and we're not complete. Like there's going to be from the Christian perspective, there's going to be a resurrection from the dead, and the people whose souls are with Christ now, according to the Christian religion, are not complete until they will be reunited with their physical bodies. So there's a very intimate and significant relationship that is, I believe, will be eternal between the body and the soul. So it's not like they're kind of like a Gnosticism or something where we want to get free of the prison house of the body or something like that. But it is a necessary composite hylomorphism, you want to call it that makes us up. And so there's, to me, that doesn't present a problem, but I don't know.
Okay.
But anyway, we probably better get going.
We didn't get to talk about Micah 5, but that's okay. I enjoyed
talking about what?
Micah 5, but
oh,
that's all right. Whatever. Yeah. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, I did too. It was very nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Maybe we can do it sometime.
Yeah, we can meet again. So it was very enjoyable and very stimulating. I love having conversations. I appreciate your open-mindedness. Those are my favorite conversations when we can just hash things. Think about them together, and hopefully both of us can learn.
Yeah.
So
cool. All right. I'll talk to you later.
Okay. Take it easy.
Bye.
I forgot to end the broadcast.